The stagecoach wheels kicked up red Utah dust as Beatrice Lawson pressed herself against the wooden seat. Every muscle in her body coiled tight as a spring, listening for the sound of pursuing hoofbeats that would mean her husband had discovered her flight. She was 22 years old, and for the past 3 years she had been the wife of Montgomery Aldrich, a man of 62 who had purchased her from her father like a prized mare. And now she was running with nothing but the clothes on her back and $17 sewn into the hem of her skirt. The year was 1876, and the landscape rolling past the window was harsh and beautiful, all red rock formations and scrub brush under a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. She had left before dawn, slipping out of the grand house in Salt Lake City, while Montgomery snored in his separate bedroom, his whiskey-soaked breath probably still rattling through the halls. The other passengers in the coach gave her curious glances, an older woman with a pinched face, a drummer with sample cases, and a young mother with a fussy infant, but Beatrice kept her eyes down and her bonnet pulled low. She did not want anyone to remember her face, to be able to describe her when Montgomery inevitably came looking. The marriage had been a transaction, nothing more. Her father had owed Montgomery money, substantial debts from failed business ventures and too many nights at the card tables, and when the debt came due, Montgomery had made his offer. He wanted a young wife, someone to grace his arm at social functions and give him an heir, and he was willing to forgive the entire debt in exchange for Beatrice's hand. Her father had agreed before she even knew what was happening, and at 19, she had found herself standing at an altar beside a man old enough to be her grandfather, speaking vows that felt like shackles closing around her wrists. The first year had been merely uncomfortable, Montgomery parading her around Salt Lake City society like a trophy while she smiled and played the dutiful wife. The second year had grown darker, his demands more insistent, his temper more volatile when she failed to conceive the child he so desperately wanted. By the third year, Beatrice had realized that if she stayed, something inside her would die completely, and that terrified her more than the prospect of running with no money and no prospects. The stagecoach pulled into Parowan, Utah just after noon, the sun beating down mercilessly on the small frontier town. Beatrice climbed down on shaking legs, her whole body aching from the journey, and looked around at her new surroundings. Parowan was not much to speak of. A main street lined with weathered wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a handful of other establishments whose purposes she could not immediately determine. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing, and the air smelled of dust and horses, and something sharp she could not quite identify. She needed work, and she needed it immediately. $17 would not last long, and she had no intention of wiring her father or anyone else who might alert Montgomery to her location. The general store seemed the most logical place to start, so she squared her shoulders, brushed as much dust from her traveling dress as possible, and walked through the front door. The interior was dim and cluttered, shelves packed with goods ranging from tinned food to bolts of fabric to farming equipment. A middle-aged man with a substantial belly and suspicious eyes looked up from behind the counter as she approached. "Help you, miss?" he asked, his tone making it clear he thought she was there to spend money she probably did not have. "I am looking for work," Beatrice said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I can read and write, I am good with figures, and I am a hard worker." The shopkeeper looked her over, taking in her fine dress and soft hands, and shook his head. "Do not need anybody. Try the boarding house down the street. Mrs. Chen sometimes needs help with the washing." Beatrice thanked him and left, trying not to let discouragement sink in too deeply. She tried the boarding house next, where a stern-faced Chinese woman informed her in heavily accented English that she had just hired someone the week before. The saloon owner laughed in her face when she inquired about work, making a crude suggestion that sent her fleeing back into the street with burning cheeks. By late afternoon, Beatrice was exhausted, hungry, and beginning to panic. She had tried every establishment in town, and no one needed help or was willing to hire a woman alone with no references and no explanation for why she was there. She was standing in the middle of the dusty street, trying to decide what to do next, when she heard a commotion coming from the far end of town. A group of riders was coming in, 5 men on horseback trailing what appeared to be several dozen head of cattle. They were coated in trail dust, hats pulled low against the sun, and moved with the easy confidence of men who spent more time in the saddle than on the ground. The lead rider was tall and lean, sitting his horse like he had been born there, and something about the way he carried himself made Beatrice unable to look away. The cowboys drove the cattle into a large corral on the outskirts of town, working together with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Beatrice watched, fascinated despite herself, as the tall cowboy swung down from his horse and began checking over the cattle with careful attention. He removed his hat to wipe sweat from his forehead, revealing dark hair and a face that was weathered but handsome, probably somewhere in his late 20s. "You lost, miss," a voice said beside her, making her jump. One of the other cowboys had approached, an older man with a grizzled beard and kind eyes. "This is not really the safest place for a lady to be standing around." "I apologize," Beatrice said quickly. "I was just watching. I have never seen cattle driven like that before." The older cowboy chuckled. "First time in a cow town, I reckon. Where you from?" Beatrice hesitated, not wanting to give too much information. "Back east," she said vaguely. "I am looking for work, actually. Do you know if anyone around here is hiring?" The cowboy scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Well now, that depends on what kind of work you are looking for. The Bar F Ranch, that is where we work, we could always use someone who can cook decent food. Our camp cook just up and quit last week, said he was too old for the trail. Boss has been doing the cooking himself, and let me tell you, that man can handle cattle and horses like nobody's business, but he cannot boil water without burning it." Hope flared in Beatrice's chest. "I can cook," she said eagerly. "I can cook very well, actually." "Would your boss consider hiring me?" The older cowboy looked skeptical. "It is rough work, miss. Trail cooking is not like cooking in a nice kitchen. You would be living in a camp with a bunch of cowboys, working long hours, dealing with weather and insects and all manner of inconveniences." "I do not care," Beatrice said firmly. "I need the work, and I promise I will do it well." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Well, I suppose it would not hurt to ask. Come on, I will introduce you to the boss." He led her across the dusty yard to where the tall cowboy was still checking over the cattle. Up close, Beatrice could see that he was probably around 28 or 29, with dark brown eyes, sun-bronzed skin, and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. He looked up as they approached, his gaze moving from the older cowboy to Beatrice with open curiosity. "Boss, this young lady here says she is looking for work," the older cowboy said. "Says she can cook. I was thinking maybe she could take over for old Pete." The tall cowboy removed his leather work gloves slowly, his eyes never leaving Beatrice's face. There was something intense about his gaze, not threatening but searching, as if he was trying to read the truth written in her features. "That's so," he said, his voice deep and measured. You have experience cooking for ranch hands. I have experience cooking for large groups, Beatrice said, which was true enough. She had overseen meal preparation for Montgomery's frequent dinner parties, though she had never actually done the cooking herself. But how different could it be? Food was food. "Where are you from?" the cowboy asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Back east," Beatrice repeated, raising her chin slightly. "I am looking for a fresh start." Something flickered across his face, understanding perhaps, or recognition of someone running from something they would rather not discuss. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "My name is Benjamin Foster," he said. "This is my ranch, the Bar F. The work is hard, the hours are long, and the pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You would be cooking for 6 men, breakfast before dawn, dinner after sunset, and lunch to take on the trail. You would be living in the camp with the rest of us, though you would have your own tent for privacy. If you cannot handle rough conditions, you should say so now, because I do not have time to train someone who is going to quit after a week." $30 a month sounded like a fortune to Beatrice. "I can handle it," she said with more confidence than she felt. "When can I start?" Benjamin Foster studied her for another long moment, then extended his hand. "Welcome to the Bar F, Miss Lawson," Beatrice said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked with his body every day. "Beatrice Lawson." "Welcome, Miss Lawson. We head back to the ranch tomorrow at dawn. Be at the livery stable at 5 o'clock sharp and do not bring anything you cannot carry on horseback." Beatrice's heart sank. "I do not have a horse." "You can ride with the supply wagon," Benjamin said. "Charlie here will show you where to find it. Go get yourself a hot meal and a good night's sleep. Tomorrow the real work begins." Beatrice spent the rest of her precious money on a room at the boarding house and a simple meal of stew and bread. She lay awake most of the night, her mind racing with worry and anticipation in equal measure. She had never lived rough, never cooked over an open fire, never spent time around working cowboys. What had she been thinking, accepting this job? But what choice did she have? At least at the ranch she would be far from Salt Lake City, far from Montgomery and his reaching influence. At least she would be working, earning her own money, beholden to no one. Dawn came too quickly. Beatrice dressed in her simplest day dress, packed her few belongings into a small carpet bag, and made her way to the livery stable as the sky was just beginning to lighten from black to gray. The cowboys were already there, loading supplies onto a sturdy wagon and saddling horses. Benjamin Foster was checking the wagon's contents, his movements efficient and purposeful, and he looked up as she approached. "Morning, Miss Lawson," he said with a slight nod. "This is where you will be riding. Charlie will be driving the wagon, so you will have company on the trip." The older cowboy from yesterday waved at her from the wagon seat, and Beatrice climbed up beside him, settling her carpetbag at her feet. The other cowboys mounted their horses, and Benjamin swung into his saddle with fluid grace, taking his position at the head of the group. "Let us move out," he called, and they began the journey to the Bar F ranch. The ride took most of the day, following dusty trails through increasingly rugged terrain. Charlie kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the ranch and the men who worked there. Beatrice learned that Benjamin Foster had built the Bar F from nothing 5 years ago, starting with a small herd and a lot of determination. He was known throughout the territory as a fair boss and a skilled cattleman, someone who worked harder than anyone he employed and expected the same level of dedication in return. "He is a good man," Charlie said, his tone respectful. "Honest, hardworking, does not tolerate cheating or laziness, but he will back his people to the end. You will be treated fair here, miss, as long as you pull your weight." They arrived at the Bar F as the sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon. The ranch was nestled in a valley surrounded by red rock formations, with a main ranch house, a large barn, several corrals, and a cluster of smaller outbuildings. The camp where the hands lived was set up a short distance from the main house, a collection of canvas tents arranged around a central fire pit with a sturdy cooking area. Benjamin dismounted and came over to help Beatrice down from the wagon. His hands were gentle but impersonal as he steadied her, then released her immediately. "That tent there is yours," he said, pointing to a tent set slightly apart from the others. "It is not much, but it is clean and dry. Take an hour to settle in, then I will show you the cooking supplies and what you will be working with." Beatrice's tent was small but adequate, with a cot, a small trunk for her belongings, and a lantern hanging from the center pole. She unpacked her few things, changed into her oldest dress, and tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. When she emerged, Benjamin was waiting by the fire pit. The cooking area was more elaborate than she had expected, with a well-built fire pit, several iron pots and pans hanging from hooks, a sturdy work table, and crates of supplies neatly stacked nearby. Benjamin showed her where everything was kept, explaining the system they used and the preferences of the various men. "Breakfast is at 5 o'clock, he said. "Coffee first thing, that is the most important part. The men need their coffee hot and strong before they do anything else. Bacon, beans, biscuits, whatever else you can put together. Dinner is after sunset, usually around 8 o'clock. Something hot and filling, meat and vegetables if we have them, always more coffee. Lunch is cold food packed up for the trail, usually bread and cold meat, maybe some cheese if it has not melted." Beatrice listened carefully, memorizing every detail. "Do you have a spring house or somewhere to keep things cool?" Benjamin nodded, looking slightly impressed. "There is a small spring-fed stream about 50 yards that way," he said, pointing. "We keep a box submerged in it for milk and butter and anything else that needs to stay cold. Charlie will show you." He was about to leave when Beatrice gathered her courage and said, "Mr. Foster, may I ask you something?" He turned back, his dark eyes unreadable. "Go ahead." "Why did you hire me? You did not ask for references, you barely asked any questions at all. For all you know, I could be a terrible cook or running from the law." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on her face. "Because you looked desperate," he said finally, his voice quiet. "And because I figured anyone desperate enough to take a job like this without knowing what she was getting into probably needed it badly. I believe in giving people chances, Miss Lawson, but I also believe in judging by results. Show me you can do the work, and we will get along fine. Try to take advantage, and you will be on the next stage back to Parowan." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Beatrice alone with her churning thoughts. She spent the next hour exploring the cooking area, taking inventory of the supplies and trying to plan her first breakfast. She had watched cooks work many times, had helped in the kitchen occasionally when she was younger, but actually being responsible for feeding 6 hungry cowboys was daunting. That night, Benjamin cooked one last meal of bacon and beans, and Beatrice ate with the men around the campfire. They were a mixed group, Charlie and 4 other cowboys whose names she struggled to remember at first. They were polite to her but reserved, clearly waiting to see if she would make it through her first week before investing any effort in getting to know her. Benjamin sat slightly apart from the group, eating in silence, his eyes on the darkening landscape. Every so often his gaze would drift to Beatrice, assessing, evaluating, but he never spoke to her directly. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her, if he could tell she was running, if he cared. That night in her tent, Beatrice lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses, the wind rustling through the canvas. She thought about Montgomery, wondered if he had discovered her absence yet, what he was doing to find her. The fear was still there, coiled in her chest, but for the first time in 3 years she also felt something else. Hope, perhaps, or possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she had a chance at something different. She woke before dawn the next morning, her body aching from sleeping on the narrow cot, and forced herself out into the cold, pre-dawn darkness. The fire pit was just glowing embers, and she spent several frantic minutes trying to coax it back to life, adding kindling and blowing on the coals until flames finally caught. She set the large coffee pot on to boil, then started mixing biscuit dough with cold fingers. The bacon was frying and the biscuits were in the Dutch oven when the cowboys started emerging from their tents, drawn by the smell of coffee and cooking food. Benjamin was first, his hair damp as if he had dunked his head in cold water to wake himself up. He poured himself a cup of coffee, took a cautious sip, and nodded once in approval. "Good coffee," he said simply, and Beatrice felt an absurd rush of pride. Breakfast went surprisingly well. The biscuits were a little uneven but edible, the bacon was crispy, and she had managed to heat up a pot of beans without burning them. The men ate with the single-minded focus of people who did hard physical labor, asking for seconds and cleaning their plates. When they headed out to start the day's work, Beatrice was left alone with a mountain of dirty dishes and a sense of accomplishment. The days fell into a rhythm. Beatrice woke before dawn, made coffee and breakfast, packed lunches, cleaned up, spent the middle of the day preparing dinner and doing whatever other chores needed doing, then served dinner and cleaned up again. It was exhausting work, harder than anything she had done in her life, and her hands quickly became rough and red from the constant washing and the heat of the fire. But it was also strangely satisfying. There was something honest about the work, something real. She was contributing, earning her keep, and no one could take that away from her. The cowboys began to warm to her as the days passed, joking with her at meals and complimenting her cooking. Charlie became something of a protector, teaching her tricks for managing the fire and the cast iron cookware, showing her which wild plants were edible and which were poisonous. Benjamin remained distant but fair, checking in each morning to see if she needed any supplies but never lingering to chat. Beatrice found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice, fascinated by the way he moved, the quiet confidence he exuded, the gentleness with which he handled the horses. He worked from before dawn until after dark every day, always the first one out and the last one in, and she never heard him complain or raise his voice in anger. 3 weeks into her employment, a violent thunderstorm rolled through the valley in the middle of the night. Beatrice woke to the sound of thunder crashing overhead and rain hammering against the canvas of her tent. Within minutes, water was seeping in through the seams, soaking her bedroll and everything else. She scrambled up, trying to move her belongings to higher ground, but the tent was flooding too quickly. Suddenly the tent flap was yanked open and Benjamin was there, rain streaming down his face, his hair plastered to his head. "Come on," he shouted over the thunder. "This tent is flooding. You can wait out the storm in the ranch house." He did not wait for her to agree, just grabbed her carpetbag in one hand and her arm with the other, pulling her out into the torrential downpour. They ran through the darkness toward the ranch house, both of them soaked through in seconds, and stumbled through the front door into blessed dryness. Benjamin set down her bag and pushed wet hair out of his eyes, breathing hard. "I am sorry," he said. I should have checked the tent more carefully before putting you in it. That seam has been weak for a while." Beatrice was shivering, her dress clinging to her body, her teeth chattering. "It is not your fault," she managed to say. "I did not expect a storm like that." Benjamin disappeared for a moment and returned with a thick blanket, which he draped around her shoulders. "The fire is banked, but I can get it going again. You should get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." He turned his back politely while Beatrice wrapped the blanket around herself, trying to preserve some modesty while stripping off her soaked dress. Her undergarments were wet too, but there was nothing to be done about that. She wrapped the blanket tight and said, "I am decent." Benjamin turned back, his own clothes dripping puddles onto the wooden floor. He stirred up the fire in the stone fireplace, adding wood until flames began to lick up the chimney, then stood there looking uncomfortable. "I will sleep out here on the floor," he said. "You can take my bed." "It is through that door there. I will have Charlie fix your tent tomorrow." "I cannot take your bed," Beatrice protested. "This is your home. And you are my employee, which means I am responsible for your welfare," Benjamin said firmly. "I am not arguing about this, Miss Lawson. Go get some sleep." Beatrice was too cold and exhausted to argue further. She gathered her blanket and her carpet bag and went through the door he had indicated, finding a small but neat bedroom with a large bed covered in quilts. She peeled off her wet undergarments, hung them over a chair, and crawled under the quilts in just her chemise, her body finally beginning to warm. She could hear Benjamin moving around in the main room, and despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. She kept thinking about the way he had come through the storm to get her, the care with which he had made sure she was warm and safe, the protective instinct that seemed second nature to him. Montgomery had never shown her that kind of consideration, never put her comfort above his own. Morning came gray and wet, the storm having settled into a steady rain. Beatrice woke to the smell of coffee and emerged from the bedroom to find Benjamin fully dressed and pouring 2 cups from a pot on the stove. "I figured I could handle breakfast this morning," he said, handing her a cup. "Let you recover a bit. Your clothes are still wet, but I have a spare shirt that might work as a dress if you belt it." He produced a large work shirt, and Beatrice took it gratefully, retreating back to the bedroom to change. The shirt hung past her knees, and with her belt cinched around the waist, it was decent enough. When she came back out, Benjamin had scrambled eggs and was frying bacon. "Thank you," Beatrice said quietly. "For last night, for this morning, you did not have to do any of that." Benjamin shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Like I said, I am responsible for my people." "Is that all I am?" Beatrice asked before she could stop herself. "One of your people." Benjamin finally looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I have not quite figured out what you are yet," he said honestly. "But no, I do not think you are just one of my people." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Beatrice did not quite dare to name, and then Benjamin turned back to the stove and the moment broke. They ate breakfast in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It felt like something had shifted between them, some barrier had cracked, and Beatrice was not sure if that terrified her or thrilled her. By afternoon, the rain had stopped and Charlie had patched the seam on Beatrice's tent, making it waterproof again. She moved her things back in, and life returned to its normal rhythm, but something was different now. Benjamin lingered a bit longer in the mornings when he checked in with her. He started joining the evening meals around the campfire instead of eating alone. He asked her opinion on things, small things like what vegetables to order from town or whether they should try smoking some of the beef for winter. Beatrice found herself drawn to him in ways she had not expected, attracted not just to his physical presence but to his character. He was steady, reliable, hardworking, fair. He treated everyone with respect, from the youngest cowboy to the oldest ranch hand. He never raised his voice or resorted to violence to make his point. He was everything Montgomery was not, and Beatrice found herself falling for him a little more each day. A month after the storm, Beatrice was at the stream washing vegetables when she heard the sound of horses approaching from the direction of town. Her heart seized in her chest, fear flooding through her, and she dropped the potatoes she had been scrubbing and ran back to camp. Benjamin was already there, watching 3 riders approach. 2 were strangers to Beatrice, rough-looking men with hard eyes, but the third made her blood run cold. It was not Montgomery, but it was Samuel Pierce, Montgomery's business partner and closest friend. He would recognize her immediately. "Stay behind me," Benjamin said quietly, and Beatrice realized he had moved to position himself between her and the approaching riders. The 3 men reined in their horses, and Samuel Pierce's eyes swept over the camp, landing on Beatrice and widening with recognition. "Well, well," he said, his voice oily and self-satisfied. "Mrs. Aldrich, your husband has been very worried about you." "I am not going back," Beatrice said, her voice shaking but determined. "I am staying here." "I am afraid that is not your decision to make," Samuel said, dismounting. "You are a married woman. Your place is with your husband." Benjamin stepped forward, his posture deceptively relaxed but his eyes hard. "The lady says she is not going. I suggest you respect that." Samuel looked Benjamin up and down dismissively. "This is none of your business, cowboy. This is a matter between a man and his wife." "She works for me," Benjamin said evenly. "That makes it my business, and I am telling you to get back on your horse and ride out of here." One of the other men reached for his gun, but Benjamin was faster, his own revolver appearing in his hand with startling speed. "I would not," he said calmly. "There are 5 other men within shouting distance, all armed, all loyal to me. You are outnumbered and outgunned. Leave now and we will forget this happened. Try to take her and things will get unpleasant." Samuel's face turned red with anger. "Montgomery Aldrich is a powerful man. He has resources, connections. You are making a very big mistake." "Maybe," Benjamin agreed, "but it is my mistake to make." "Now ride out." The 3 men hesitated, clearly weighing their options, then Samuel remounted his horse with a curse. "This is not over," he spat at Beatrice. "Montgomery will not let you go so easily." They rode off, and Beatrice felt her knees go weak. Benjamin holstered his gun and turned to her, his expression concerned. "Are you all right?" "No," Beatrice whispered, and then she was crying, great gulping sobs of fear and relief and gratitude. Benjamin hesitated only a moment before putting his arms around her, holding her while she shook, his hand stroking her hair gently. "It is all right," he murmured. "You are safe here. I will not let anyone take you." "You do not understand," Beatrice said against his chest. "My husband, Montgomery, he is powerful. He has money and influence. He will keep looking for me. He will make trouble for you for the ranch." "Let him try," Benjamin said firmly. He pulled back slightly, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "Listen to me, Beatrice. I do not know the whole story, and you do not have to tell me if you do not want to. But I know enough to understand that you ran from something bad, something that scared you enough to leave everything behind. I am not going to let anyone drag you back to that. You deserve better." "What do I deserve?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely audible. Benjamin's thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "You deserve someone who loves you," he said quietly. "Someone who treats you with respect and kindness. Someone who values you for who you are, not what you can give them." The words hit Beatrice like a physical blow, so simple and yet so profound. She had never thought about what she deserved, had been taught from childhood that her purpose was to serve, to obey, to be useful. The idea that she might deserve love, real love, felt revolutionary. "What if I want that someone to be you?" she whispered, hardly daring to say the words aloud. Benjamin's breath caught, his eyes searching her face. "Beatrice, you are running from a bad marriage. You are vulnerable right now." "I do not want to take advantage of that." "You are not taking advantage," Beatrice said, gaining confidence. "I have been falling in love with you for weeks now, Benjamin. The way you work, the way you treat people, the way you look at the sunset like it is something precious. The way you protected me just now without a second thought. That is not vulnerability talking. That is me finally understanding what I have been missing my whole life." Benjamin closed his eyes for a moment, as if in pain, then opened them again and looked at her with such intensity she felt it in her bones. "You are still married," he said. "I will not dishonor you or myself by starting something while you are still tied to another man." "Then help me get free," Beatrice said urgently. "There must be a way. Divorce, annulment, something." "Divorce is hard to get, especially for a woman," Benjamin said slowly. "But maybe if your husband is as powerful and proud as you say, he might grant you one to avoid scandal." "We would need a lawyer, someone who knows the laws." "I do not have money for a lawyer," Beatrice said, despair creeping back in. "I do," Benjamin said firmly. "And I will spend every penny if it means setting you free, but you need to tell me everything, Beatrice. I need to know what we are up against." So she told him, there in his arms beside the campfire, the whole sordid story of her father's debts and Montgomery's bargain and the 3 years of her life that had been stolen. Benjamin listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening at certain parts but his arms never loosening their hold on her. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then said, "That man does not deserve you. He never did. And I am going to do everything in my power to make sure he never gets you back." Over the next few weeks, Benjamin made several trips to Parowan, consulting with a lawyer who owed him a favor. The news was not encouraging. Divorce required grounds like adultery or abandonment, and it had to be filed in court, which meant publicity and scrutiny. Beatrice would have to testify about her reasons for leaving, and Montgomery would have the opportunity to dispute everything she said. But there was another option. If they could prove that the marriage had been entered into under duress, that Beatrice had not given free consent, it might be possible to get an annulment. The challenge would be proving it, especially against a man of Montgomery's standing. "We need your father to testify," the lawyer told Benjamin. "If he is willing to admit that he forced the marriage to settle his debts, that would give us a strong case." "My father would never do that," Beatrice said when Benjamin relayed this information. "It would ruin him socially and financially. He cares more about his reputation than he ever cared about me." "Then we will find another way," Benjamin said stubbornly. "Maybe one of the servants who worked in your house, someone who witnessed Montgomery's treatment of you, or business associates who knew about the debt arrangement." Meanwhile, life on the ranch continued. Beatrice kept cooking, kept working, but now there was a new dimension to her relationship with Benjamin. They were not courting, not in any traditional sense, but there was an understanding between them, a promise of what could be if they could just get free of the past. Benjamin was scrupulously careful not to compromise her reputation. He never came to her tent, never touched her beyond the occasional brush of hands, never did anything that could be construed as improper. But the longing in his eyes when he looked at her was unmistakable, and Beatrice felt it reflected in her own heart. 2 months after Samuel Pierce's visit, a formal letter arrived from Montgomery's lawyer. It demanded that Beatrice return to Salt Lake City immediately or face legal action for abandonment and theft of property. The letter made her blood boil with its cold, clinical language, treating her like a runaway horse rather than a human being with thoughts and feelings. "Let him sue," Benjamin said when he read the letter. "It will give us our day in court, a chance to present our case. But what if we lose?" Beatrice asked fearfully. "What if the judge sides with Montgomery?" "Then we will run," Benjamin said simply. "We will pack up everything, sell the ranch, and go somewhere he cannot find us. California maybe, or Oregon, somewhere you can be free." "I cannot ask you to give up everything you have built," Beatrice protested. Benjamin took her hands in his calloused thumbs rubbing gentle circles on her palms. "You are not asking. I am offering. This ranch is important to me, but you are more important. I have spent the last 5 years building something I could be proud of, but what is the point of all of it if I cannot share it with someone I love?" It was the first time he had said the words directly, and Beatrice felt tears spring to her eyes. "You love me." "I love you," Benjamin confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the day you stood in that dusty corral looking terrified and determined in equal measure. I have loved you through every burned biscuit and perfect cup of coffee. I have loved watching you become stronger and more confident, loved seeing you laugh with the men around the campfire, loved the way you hum to yourself when you think no one is listening. I love you, Beatrice, and if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Beatrice threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with all the pent-up longing of the past months. Benjamin kissed her back with a hunger that matched her own, his arms tight around her waist, lifting her off her feet. It was not a gentle kiss or a careful one. It was a kiss full of promise and passion and the desperate need for connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Benjamin pressed his forehead to hers. "We should not be doing this yet," he said, though he made no move to release her. "Not until you are free." "I do not care about should," Beatrice said fiercely. "I have spent my whole life doing what I should. Being the daughter I should be, the wife I should be. I am done with should. I want to be with you, Benjamin. I want to choose my own life for once." "Then choose me," Benjamin said, kissing her again, softer this time. "And I will choose you, every day for the rest of our lives." They decided to file for annulment before Montgomery could file his lawsuit. Benjamin's lawyer drew up the papers, citing duress and lack of consent, and they filed with the territorial court in Parowan. Montgomery fought it viciously, hiring expensive lawyers to contest every point, dragging up every bit of gossip and innuendo they could find about Beatrice. The trial was set for late October 1876, and Beatrice spent the weeks leading up to it in a state of constant anxiety. Benjamin stayed by her side as much as possible, reassuring her, supporting her, loving her even though they were both careful to maintain propriety in public. The morning of the trial, Beatrice dressed in her best dress, the one she had been wearing when she fled, and walked into the small courthouse with her head held high. Montgomery was there, looking every day of his 65 years, his face florid with anger. He glared at her with such venom that she instinctively moved closer to Benjamin. The trial lasted 2 days. Beatrice testified about her father's debts, about being forced into marriage, about Montgomery's coldness and demands. Montgomery's lawyers tried to paint her as an ungrateful wife who had abandoned a generous husband. But Benjamin's lawyer countered with carefully worded questions about the age difference, about the financial arrangement, about whether Beatrice had ever been given a real choice. The turning point came when Charlie took the stand. He testified that he had known Beatrice's father years ago, had been present at several card games where the man had lost heavily. He testified that he had heard Montgomery boasting about his acquisition of a young wife, talking about her like property rather than a person. His testimony was damning, and Montgomery's lawyers could not shake it. The judge, an older man with shrewd eyes, took only an hour to deliberate. When he returned, his expression was grave. "I find that the marriage between Montgomery Aldrich and Beatrice Lawson was entered into under circumstances that do not reflect free and informed consent by Mrs. Aldrich. The marriage is hereby annulled, effective immediately. Mrs. Aldrich is free to leave this court as a single woman with no legal ties to Mr. Aldrich." Beatrice felt her knees go weak, and Benjamin caught her, his arm strong around her waist. It was over. She was free. Montgomery rose to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is an outrage. I will appeal. I will take this all the way to the territorial governor. You are welcome to try, Mr. Aldrich," the judge said coldly, "but I suspect you will find little sympathy. The circumstances of this marriage were questionable at best and coercive at worst. Be grateful I am not pursuing charges of human trafficking." Montgomery stormed out of the courthouse, his lawyers scrambling after him, and Beatrice turned to Benjamin with tears streaming down her face. "I am free," she whispered. "I am actually free." "You are free," Benjamin confirmed. And then he was kissing her right there in the courthouse, in front of the judge and the lawyers and anyone else who cared to watch. Beatrice kissed him back, pouring every ounce of gratitude and love and relief into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, Benjamin took her hand and led her out into the October sunshine. "So," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "what does a newly freed woman want to do with her life?" "Marry a cowboy," Beatrice said without hesitation, "if he will have me." Benjamin's smile widened into a grin. "I think that can be arranged." They were married a week later in the small church in Parowan, with all the ranch hands in attendance and half the town besides. Beatrice wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Benjamin wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous and completely besotted. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Benjamin kissed her with such tenderness that several of the older women in attendance were seen dabbing at their eyes. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, a massive feast that Beatrice had prepared with help from several women in town who had befriended her. There was roasted beef and fresh bread, apple pie and corn pudding, coffee and whiskey, and endless laughter. The cowboys took turns congratulating Benjamin and teasing him mercilessly, and Beatrice sat beside her new husband feeling happier than she had ever thought possible. That night, Benjamin carried her over the threshold of the ranch house, which he had spent the past week cleaning and decorating. He had put wildflowers in jars on every surface, had washed all the curtains and rugs, had made sure everything was perfect for her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Foster," he said, setting her down gently. "Welcome home," Beatrice echoed, looking around at what was now her home. Her home, not someone else's that she was merely allowed to occupy. Her home with the man she loved, built on honesty and respect and genuine affection. Benjamin was gentle with her that night, patient and loving, taking his time to show her what it felt like to be truly cherished. Beatrice had never experienced anything like it, the connection they shared, the way their bodies moved together like they were made for each other. Afterward, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt peace settle over her like a blanket. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Benjamin asked, his hand stroking her hair. "For seeing me," Beatrice said. "For telling me I deserved someone who loved me, for being that someone." Benjamin kissed the top of her head. "I am the one who should be thanking you. For being brave enough to run, to choose a different life. For choosing me." "Always," Beatrice promised. "I will always choose you." Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Beatrice was no longer the camp cook, but the ranch owner's wife, which came with different responsibilities. She still cooked, because she enjoyed it, but now she also helped with the books, dealt with suppliers, and gradually took over management of the household. Benjamin hired a young man to take over the camp cooking duties, freeing Beatrice to focus on building their life together. The first winter was hard, with snow piling up in the valley and temperatures dropping below freezing for weeks at a time. But Beatrice and Benjamin faced it together, spending long evenings by the fire talking and planning and dreaming about the future. Benjamin taught her to ride properly, and she spent the warmer days helping move cattle or checking fence lines, loving the freedom of being out in the open air. In the spring, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions, joy and fear tangled together. She had never conceived during her marriage to Montgomery, and part of her had wondered if she was barren. But this was different. This was a child created with love, and she found herself cautiously excited. Benjamin was overjoyed when she told him, picking her up and spinning her around despite her protests that she might be sick. He became even more protective than usual, fussing over her constantly, until Beatrice had to remind him that she was pregnant, not dying. Their son was born in December 1877, during a snowstorm that made it impossible to get the doctor from town. Benjamin delivered the baby himself with Charlie's help, his hands steady even though Beatrice could see the fear in his eyes. When he placed the squalling infant in her arms, both of them crying, Beatrice felt a completeness she had never known existed. They named him James Foster, after Benjamin's father who had died when Benjamin was young. Jamie, as they called him, was a healthy, happy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. Benjamin was a devoted father, getting up for night feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and staring at him in wonder. "I cannot believe he is ours," Benjamin said one night, watching Jamie sleep in the cradle he had built with his own hands. "That we made something this perfect." "We did," Beatrice agreed, leaning against her husband's side. "We made him together out of love. That is what makes him perfect." The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from a small operation to one of the most successful in the territory. Beatrice proved to have a head for business, negotiating better prices with buyers and making smart investments that increased their holdings. Benjamin continued to be the heart of the operation, the man who worked alongside his hands and never asked anyone to do something he would not do himself. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Clara in 1880 and another son named Thomas in 1883. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Beatrice hired help as needed, but she never forgot what it was like to do the work herself, and she treated her employees with the same fairness and respect that Benjamin showed his ranch hands. Montgomery Aldrich died in 1881, his obituary noting that he was survived by no one, his fortune going to distant relatives who had barely known him. Beatrice felt a strange sense of closure when she heard the news, as if a chapter of her life had finally been definitively closed. She did not mourn him, could not mourn him, but she hoped he had found some peace in the end. Her father wrote to her once, several years after the trial, a stilted letter asking for money. Beatrice sent him a small amount along with a note saying it was the last he would receive from her. She never heard from him again, and she did not regret cutting those ties. He had made his choices, and now she was free to make hers. As the years turned into decades, Beatrice and Benjamin grew old together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They faced challenges together. Years of drought and disease, the death of beloved friends, the struggles of raising children in a harsh environment. But they also experienced joys beyond measure, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own, building something lasting that would survive them. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Beatrice up to a ridge overlooking the valley where the ranch spread out below them. It was autumn, her favorite season, and the air was crisp and clear. "You remember the day we met?" Benjamin asked, his arm around her waist. "I remember being terrified and desperate and certain I was making a terrible mistake," Beatrice said with a smile. "And then you told me I deserved someone who loved me." "And I meant it," Benjamin said. "You deserved so much more than what life had given you up to that point. I just wanted to be the one to give it to you." "You have," Beatrice said, turning to face him fully. "You have given me everything I never knew I needed. A home, children, respect, partnership, love. So much love, Benjamin. Every day with you has been a gift." "The gift has been mine," Benjamin said, kissing her softly. "You took a chance on a dusty cowboy with a struggling ranch and a lot of hope. You built this life with me. You made me better than I ever could have been alone." They stood there together, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Below them, the ranch was alive with activity, their children and grandchildren going about the business of living, carrying on the legacy they had created. Beatrice leaned her head on Benjamin's shoulder, content in a way she never would have believed possible all those years ago when she fled in terror on a dusty stagecoach. She had been running from something terrible, but what she had found was something wonderful. She had found herself, her strength, her purpose. And she had found Benjamin, the man who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself, who had loved her into wholeness. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for everything she felt but the best she could offer. "For what?" Benjamin asked, the same question he had asked on their wedding night. "For everything," Beatrice said. "For giving me a chance, for protecting me, for loving me, for showing me what life could be when you choose it for yourself." "Always," Benjamin promised, echoing her words from that long-ago night. "I will always choose you." And he kept that promise every day for the rest of their lives. They grew old together on the ranch they had built, surrounded by family and friends, their love story becoming legend in the valley. People spoke of the young woman who had fled a bad marriage and the cowboy who had given her a chance, who had told her she deserved someone who loved her, and then spent his life proving it. When Benjamin died in 1910 at the age of 62, peacefully in his sleep after a full life well lived, Beatrice held his hand and told him one last time that she loved him, that choosing him had been the best decision of her life. She followed him 2 years later. Her heart simply deciding it had beaten long enough, and they were buried side by side on the ridge overlooking the valley, where they had stood together so many times watching the sunset. Their children continued to run the ranch, passing it down to their own children, and the story of Beatrice and Benjamin became family lore, told and retold at gatherings. The story of how love could bloom in the harshest circumstances, how courage could change the course of a life, how one person believing in another could make all the difference. The ranch still stands today, though much changed from those early days, but the ridge where Beatrice and Benjamin are buried remains untouched, a memorial to two people who found each other when they both needed it most. And on autumn evenings when the light is just right, you can almost see them there, standing together watching the sunset, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, two souls who were meant to be together finally at peace. The Bar F Ranch became one of the most successful operations in Utah, known not just for its quality cattle but for the fairness with which it was run. The legacy of a man who believed in giving people chances, and a woman who had seized her chance with both hands. The Foster family became pillars of the community, known for their generosity and their willingness to help others, particularly women in difficult situations. Jamie Foster, their oldest son, took over primary management of the ranch when his father's health began to decline, continuing the traditions his parents had established. Clara married a teacher and started the first school in the valley, educating generations of children. Thomas became a lawyer, dedicating his career to helping women escape bad marriages, inspired by his mother's story. Each of the children passed down the story to their own children, the tale of how their grandmother had fled a terrible situation with nothing but courage and hope, how their grandfather had seen something special in a desperate young woman and given her a chance. They told of how their grandparents had built something lasting together, not just a ranch but a family, a legacy, a love story that endured beyond death. Beatrice had kept a journal during her years at the ranch, starting the day after she arrived and continuing until just days before her death. In it, she chronicled the daily details of ranch life, but also her inner journey from frightened runaway to confident woman, from someone who did not believe she deserved love to someone who knew her own worth. The journal was passed down through the family, becoming a treasured heirloom that reminded each generation of the strength it took to choose your own life. In one of the final entries, written on her 50th wedding anniversary, Beatrice reflected on the journey she had taken. "I was 22 years old when I ran, terrified and alone, with no idea what I was running toward, only what I was running from. If someone had told me then what my life would become, I would not have believed them. I would not have believed that I could be this happy, this fulfilled, this loved. Benjamin gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. He helped me see myself as worthy of love and respect. And then he spent 50 years proving it to me every single day. If I could go back and tell that frightened girl on the stage coach one thing, it would be this: you are braver than you know, stronger than you believe, and deserving of so much more than you have been given. Hold on. Keep going. The life you are meant to live is waiting for you, and it will be more beautiful than you can imagine." The love between Beatrice and Benjamin became the foundation upon which generations of Fosters built their lives. Their descendants went on to become ranchers, teachers, lawyers, doctors, artists, all carrying forward the values their ancestors had modeled: fairness, hard work, respect for all people, and the courage to choose your own path even when that path is difficult. The ranch expanded over the decades, acquiring neighboring properties, modernizing operations while maintaining the core principles Benjamin had established. Through economic depressions and world wars, through droughts and disasters, the Foster family held on to the land, determined to preserve what Beatrice and Benjamin had built together. In 1926, on what would have been Beatrice and Benjamin's 50th wedding anniversary had they lived, the family gathered at the ranch for a massive reunion. More than 200 people attended, all descendants of Beatrice and Benjamin, along with descendants of the Cowboys who had worked the original Bar F. They told stories, shared memories, and visited the graves on the ridge. Jamie, now an old man himself, stood before the assembled family and told the story one more time, the story of his mother fleeing a terrible marriage, his father offering her a chance, and the love that had bloomed between them against all odds. His voice broke with emotion as he described his father saying, "You deserve someone who loves you," the words that had changed everything. "They gave us more than land or money," Jamie said to his assembled family. They gave us an example of what love should look like. They showed us that where you start does not determine where you end up, that courage and determination and faith in each other can overcome any obstacle. They taught us that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. And they proved that real love, the kind that lasts, is built on friendship and partnership and mutual respect, not on transactions or power or control. The family raised glasses to toast Beatrice and Benjamin, their voices carrying across the valley in the twilight. And for just a moment, it seemed like the two spirits might be there with them, watching over the family they had created, proud of the legacy they had left behind. The story of Beatrice and Benjamin Foster became more than just family history. It was recorded in local histories, mentioned in books about the settling of Utah, referenced in legal cases about marriage and women's rights. Their love story became a symbol of hope for anyone trapped in difficult circumstances, proof that it was possible to escape, to start over, to build something better. Schools taught about Beatrice as an example of courage and self-determination. Churches used their story as an illustration of redemptive love. Lawyers referenced their case when arguing for clients trapped in coercive marriages. They became larger-than-life legends, but to their family, they were always just grandma and grandpa, the ones who had started it all. The Bar F Ranch continues to operate to this day, now run by the sixth generation of Fosters. The original ranch house still stands, preserved as a family museum, with Beatrice's kitchen implements on display and Benjamin's saddle hanging in the hall. Tourists come from all over to see the place where the famous love story unfolded, to stand on the ridge where Beatrice and Benjamin are buried, to feel the connection to a time when love conquered all. And on autumn evenings, when the light slants golden across the valley and the air carries the scent of sage and dust, it is not hard to imagine them there still. The young woman who had fled and the cowboy who had told her she deserved someone who loved her, together forever in the land they had claimed as their own, their love story echoing through the generations, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and choosing love over fear.